going right to the audience here. You're a little nervous about this garden hose full of sulfur dioxide?
Well, I just wonder what the diversion of resources towards these engineering tactics would have on trying to curb greenhouse gas emissions if we accept the fact that they are actually causing problems.
But if he's solving the problem, then who cares about greenhouse gas emissions?
But that would also require continued investment in this type of engineering, where you'd have continued injection of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere for who knows how long, because we're not addressing the core of the issue of greenhouse gas emissions.
Stephen?
Yeah, that's a great point. One of many very legitimate objections to geoengineering, by the way. I will say this, the cost objection is probably the smallest. What it actually costs to execute this plan to spritz the stratosphere with sulfur dioxide, compared to even the gentlest carbon mitigation plan, is the equivalent of finding a penny on the street, literally. It's a couple $100 million perhaps, as opposed to $1 trillion a year or more going forward. That said, the environmental issues are separate, which would be if you start to do it and you need to continue to do it, it could create a variety of problems. Environmental problems on the one hand, and B, the more difficult one, which is an excuse to pollute. In other words, think of it this way. When you wear a seatbelt in a car, do you drive more recklessly? Some people may, others may not. So you have to...
I do.
You know, NASCAR drivers apparently do too. We wrote about this once. After Dale Earnhardt's death, there were all these safety innovations brought in. What happened is, once they were safer in the cars, the drivers had a tendency to crash more, because strategically, taking the risk was worth it, but they also knew they probably wouldn't die. So I'm not saying there aren't objectives, but the point is, with any intervention, with any help, with any innovation, there are costs and benefits, and you have to look at them. That's it.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering what happens if this sulfur dioxide system fails. Sulfur dioxide runs out of the atmosphere very quickly, and you would actually have catastrophic warming after that. Further, sulfur dioxide is actually an ingredient in acid rain. So we were talking about carbon fertilization and improved economic growth because of more carbon dioxide for the plants. Now you have this problem of acid rain. Even if the system doesn't fail, that could hamper our growth.
Yeah, you would think that acid rain should be the first objection to putting sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere. The reasons why scientists, including a Nobel-winning hardcore environmental scientist named Paul Crutzen, who is known as Dr. Ozone for having looked at the ozone, the destruction of the ozone layer, when he looked at what happened at Mount Pinatubo, and he looked at our ability to cut down on our carbon, he said, there's no way we're going to be able to do it, and therefore I reluctantly endorse the idea of sulfur dioxide in the stratosphere.
I'm glad you brought up acid rain, because people say, you guys in suits said government can't clean the air, and there were plans to get rid of acid rain with laws that restricted sulfur dioxide use. It worked. Why won't these laws restricting carbon dioxide work? Jerry?
Depends on how we're going to define work. I mean, the fact is, the reason we have a debate about how much it would cost to address climate change is because we can only make guesses about what non-carbon-based fuels are going to cost 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now. So, for instance, if there were technological breakthroughs that allowed us to get cheap wind-powered electricity and a battery that could then take the wind that was generated, or the wind electricity that was generated at night and then use it during the day or something like that, then we could address climate change at very little cost. We don't know what wind energy is going to cost 30 years from now. We can only make guesses. When economists pencil this stuff out, they generally assume today's cost will be tomorrow's cost after making some adjustments.
It almost never is.
And it almost never is. Now, that's not because government regulations change the trajectory of the cost curves necessarily. It just means that we can only guess about tomorrow's cost. It's not that we're always wrong in shooting into a high-cost scenario, by the way. In 1990, California passed a zero-emissions vehicle program, where they mandated that a climbing percentage of the new cars sold in California have zero emissions, which would be a pretty neat trick. Well, it turns out it wasn't possible. And so California just said, oh, never mind, forget that. And the law was just shelved, and most people didn't even notice. So it's not as if all estimates are off by overestimating cost compliance. In a lot of cases, they actually underestimate, but we don't hear about those stories because we just bury those laws.
Jerry Taylor, Stephen Dubner, I thank you very much for being here. Again, I have to ask, why is climate change a crisis? The world has bigger problems. Let's say we accept that study by the World Health Organization Jerry referred to that claims 150,000 deaths from global warming.
Compare that to the 3 million people who die from malnutrition every year, or the 1 million who die because of poor sanitation, and 1 million who die from indoor air pollution because they burn animal dung to heat their homes. That's why I get upset when the media and Hollywood get so hysterical about climate change.
This affects every single one of us, and that's not something you can say about any other issue or any other crises.
But so what? The world has bigger problems. And for a fraction of the cost of trying to stop global warming, we could improve the lives of millions by giving poor people vitamin supplements or raising living standards through freer trade. Some economists, including Nobel Prize winners, recently ranked 30 such life-saving reforms. Stopping global warming came in last. If global warming is a problem, our best defense is to be rich enough to adapt to it. If we try, as President Obama suggests, to reduce our greenhouse gases by precisely 83%, I don't know where he gets that number rather than 84, 82. If we do that, we're going to be much poorer. The billions we spent on the next Kyoto or cap and trade will make almost no difference for global warming. To spend that would be such a horrible waste. Thank you for watching. I'm John Stossel. Good night.